The morning my husband destroyed our marriage on live television, I was wearing shoes he picked out for me. I remember that detail more than anything else. Not the studio lights, not the 47,000 people watching, not even the sound of his voice saying her name out loud, on camera, while I sat 8 months pregnant beside him on a cream-colored sofa, the shoes, because that's how it starts. Not with one big betrayal, with 1,000 small ones, the shoes you wear because he prefers them, the job you leave because it's easier for him if you do, the voice inside you that starts saying something is wrong, and the part of you that has learned, very carefully, very quietly, to tell that voice to be still. I told that voice to be still for 4 years. And then one Tuesday morning, in front of a television camera, in front of half of Nashville, my husband looked at the woman he had been seeing for nearly a year, and he looked at me. And he chose. I stood up from that sofa, I smoothed my dress, I thanked the viewers for their time, and I walked off that set. What happened next? The billionaire who followed me into that hallway, the career I thought I had lost forever, the daughter who changed everything, and the moment I finally felt nothing when I looked at the man who broke me. That is the story I am about to tell you. And if you have ever made yourself smaller to fit someone else's life, this story is for you. The lesson this story carries: when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. And when the life you built starts to disappear, look carefully. Because underneath it, the life you were always meant to live has been waiting. If this story speaks to you, if it reminds you of someone you love or someone you used to be, please like this video, leave a comment below, share it with a woman who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to this channel so you never miss a story like this one. Every share puts this in front of someone who might need it exactly right now.
The fluorescent lights hummed. That was the first thing Claire noticed. Not the smell of fresh coffee. Not the quiet murmur of the television monitor down the hall. Just that steady, low hum. The kind of sound you only hear when everything else is too quiet. She was sitting in front of a makeup mirror in the green room of Good Morning Nashville. The woman staring back at her wore a blue wrap dress. It pulled tight across her belly. She was 8 months pregnant, and the dress made that fact unmistakable. Derek had picked the dress. He had also picked the shoes. The shoes are too tight. I knew they were going to be too tight. I put them on anyway because Derek said the blue ones photograph better. 8 months pregnant, and I let him pick my shoes. The makeup artist leaned closer. Her name was Kylie. She was maybe 23 years old and had not stopped talking since they arrived 45 minutes ago. She was adding a second coat of something to Claire's cheekbones. Claire smiled at her reflection. She was very good at smiling. "This is so exciting," Kylie said. "I watch Good Morning Nashville every single morning. Jenna Locke is amazing. You must be so nervous." "A little," Claire said. She was not nervous. She did not know what she was. Across the room, Derek stood with his back half-turned, talking on his phone. He had been on his phone since they walked through the studio entrance. He was wearing the gray suit Claire had selected for him last Thursday. He looked handsome in it. He always looked handsome. That had never been the problem. She watched his face in the mirror. He kept turning slightly away from the room when he spoke. Just a few degrees, the way a person turns when they do not want to be overheard. His jaw was tight. His free hand moved to his collar and then dropped. He's probably dealing with something from the office. The acquisition is still finalizing. He has a lot going on. She believed this. She needed to believe this. She picked up her phone from the makeup table and checked it. Nothing. She checked it again, locked it, unlocked it, locked it, set it down, picked it up again. 3 times. Lock, unlock, lock, unlock, lock, lock. She put it in her bag. The door opened. Dana, the show's producer, came in carrying a tablet and a headset. She moved the way producers always moved, fast and purposeful, slightly ahead of whatever was happening. "Good morning," Dana said. "Quick rundown before we go. Your segment is called Nashville's Rising Star. It runs approximately 8 minutes. Jenna will ask about Derek's promotion, the company, what it means for your family. Very warm, very celebratory. Nothing you haven't been briefed on. Derek ended his call. He crossed the room toward Dana and asked her something Claire couldn't quite hear. Dana checked her tablet, said something back. Derek's jaw shifted. Just slightly, like a small internal recalibration. There, that? What was that? Claire watched him in the monitor. She kept her own face perfectly still. She had become very good at that over the past year, watching from a slight distance, like a person watching a film they have seen before. Knowing something is about to go wrong, unsure exactly when. Dana kept talking. She mentioned the other segment guest. Grant Holloway, founder of Holloway Acquisitions, would be joining the show for the following piece. A brief announcement about the completed purchase of Meridian Group. Dana said his name with a particular hushed quality, the voice people used for very wealthy men. Derek said nothing. His hand went to his collar again. Dana left. The room settled back into the hum of the fluorescent lights. The monitor in the hallway switched from a commercial to the live feed. Jenna Locke was wrapping up a segment about rescue dogs. She was laughing at something the guest said. Warm and easy. She made everything look safe. Derek crossed back to where Claire sat. He placed both hands on her shoulders. He looked at her in the mirror. His smile was the one she had fallen in love with, the one that started at his eyes and moved outward. He used it now. You look beautiful, he said. This is going to be a good morning. He said almost exactly those words the morning I found the earring in his jacket pocket, 6 months ago. The one he said belonged to his colleague. I believed him then too. She had believed him. She had chosen to believe him because the alternative required dismantling everything. She was 6 months pregnant. Dismantling was not something she could afford. Thank you, she said. Kylie was adding finishing powder. The brush was soft against Claire's cheekbone. The coffee on the table had gone cold. Claire picked it up and drank it anyway. The year was important. Claire Ashworth had been married for 4 years. She had been pregnant for 8 months. Before those two facts became the primary facts of her existence, she had been the senior marketing director at Callaway Brand Group. She had built 4 national campaigns from scratch. She had won a regional advertising award at 29 years old. She had cried in the parking garage afterward because she had not expected to win and could not believe it was real. She had left that job 2.5 years ago. Derek said it made more sense. His career was accelerating. They were talking about starting a family. Someone had to be flexible. Claire had always been better at flexibility. That was how it was framed. She had told herself it was a mutual decision. She had told herself that many times. Kylie poked her head back around the door. 2 minutes, we're ready for you. Derek squeezed Claire's shoulders. He was already moving toward the door. He did not look back. Claire sat alone at the mirror for a moment. She looked at the woman in the blue dress, the careful smile, the tight shoes, the cold coffee, the hands folded carefully over her belly. Something moved in her chest that was not quite fear and not quite knowledge. It lived exactly in the space between them. She stood up. She smoothed the dress over her belly. She walked toward the door. In the narrow corridor between the green room and the studio floor, Derek reached for her hand. He did it automatically, the way a person reaches for a prop they forgot to carry. She took his hand. They walked together. Through the glass window of the adjacent green room, she saw a woman sitting alone. Young, dark hair, a green silk blouse, sitting very still, looking directly at the corridor. Looking directly at Derek. Derek did not look at the woman in the green silk blouse. He looked straight ahead, very deliberately straight ahead. You only look that deliberately away from something when you are very aware that it is there. The studio lights were warm and bright. Jenna Locke rose from her chair and extended her hand with a luminous smile. The floor director held up 5 fingers. 4, 3, 2. The cameras rolled. Nobody tells you how small television sets actually are. Claire had watched Good Morning Nashville from her kitchen dozens of times. On screen, the set looked warm and spacious. Cream-colored furniture, soft lighting, a backdrop of the Nashville skyline curved around the back wall. In person, it was the size of a large living room. The cameras were enormous. The crew moved constantly in the peripheral dark. Everything that happened inside this small, bright space was being watched by approximately 47,000 people right now. On televisions across Nashville, on phones, on tablets, 47,000 people drinking their morning coffee, watching a woman with a careful smile sit very still on a cream-colored sofa. Jenna Locke mentioned the number in her introduction. 47,000 Nashville families are waking up with us this morning, she said. She said it like a gift. Claire sat on the cream sofa. Derek was to her left. Jenna faced them from her armchair, leaning slightly forward. The segment was going exactly the way Dana had outlined it. Jenna asked Derek about the promotion. Derek answered well. He was charming. He had always been charming. It was one of the first things Claire had loved about him. This ability to fill a room, to make whoever he was talking to feel like the only person in his vision. He was doing it now, with Jenna, and Jenna was responding to it. Claire watched her husband work the room from 18 inches away and felt, very quietly, like she was watching a man she did not know. Who is this person? When did I stop knowing him? Was there a specific day? Or did it happen like water wearing down stone, slowly, constantly, invisibly, until one day the stone just isn't there? Jenna turned to Claire, asked how she was feeling, how the pregnancy was going, whether they had a name yet. Claire answered with practiced ease, one hand resting on the curve of her belly. She said they were thinking about names. She said she was feeling well. She said they were very excited. These sentences came out of her mouth in the right order with the right warmth. She heard herself saying them from a strange distance, the way you hear your own voice when you are slightly outside your body. Jenna asked Derek how it felt, becoming a father for the first time. The pause before he answered was one beat too long. One beat, nothing that 47,000 people drinking coffee would notice. Everything that the woman sitting 18 inches to his left noticed. She had been reading his pauses for 4 years. It's a big change, Derek said. He smiled. A lot of things are changing. Jenna laughed warmly, said something about how life kept surprising us. Moved to the next question. Claire sat very still. The lights were warm on her face. The cameras had shifted to Derek, who was talking about Meridian Group's new direction under Holloway Acquisitions. He was animated, engaged, more present than he had been with her in months. She looked at his profile. The jaw she knew, the hands she knew, the way his right wrist turned slightly when he was excited. The voice she had listened to across 1,000 dinner tables in the dark of their bedroom, in arguments and laughter for 4 years. She did not recognize the man making these sounds. It came not as a crash, but as a quiet, terrible clearing, the way fog lifts, not all at once, in sections, revealing the landscape piece by piece. She was looking at a stranger in a suit she had bought for him, sitting in a television studio, her feet aching in the wrong shoes. When did he become a stranger? When did I become a guest in my own marriage? The monitors at the edge of the studio showed the segment as it aired. Herself and Derek. Cream sofa, warm skyline. They looked on screen like a handsome couple. like a success story. The image was completely convincing. She wondered how long an image could convince people of something that was no longer true. Jenna was wrapping toward the close, steering them toward the warm, final question. The send-off. Claire could feel it ending. She could feel herself about to be released. Whatever was happening here would pause. She could go back to locking things away. Before we close, Jenna said, shifting slightly in her chair, I wanted to bring up something our producer flagged this morning. There's a bit of a surprise on today's show. She smiled at Derek. Grant Holloway is joining us in just a few minutes. The CEO of Holloway Acquisitions. And of course, as VP of Sales at Meridian, you two will have a lot to discuss. She turned to the camera. Don't go anywhere, Nashville. A lot more good news is coming up. The floor director waved. Commercial break, the lights shifted slightly. Crew moved in the dark. Derek did not move. He sat, with his hands on his knees, jaw tight, eyes tracking to the far side of the studio. A door was opening. A production assistant led someone through. A tall man, mid-40s, dark suit, no tie. He moved through the space with a complete and quiet certainty. Not performative, simply at home in rooms like this. Grant Holloway crossed the studio floor without looking up. He was speaking in low tones to the assistant, checking his phone. Then he looked up. He saw the sofa. He saw Derek. He saw Claire. And then, very briefly, he saw everything else, because the door on the far side of the studio opened again. The woman in the green silk blouse walked through it. Kayla Brennan crossed the studio floor and stopped when she saw Derek. She stopped when she saw Claire. Then she looked at Derek. Her expression was the expression of a person who had been waiting, who was tired of waiting, who had decided that waiting was over. I'm not imagining this. I am not crazy. I know what I see. The commercial was still running on the monitors. Somewhere a floor director was counting down. Somewhere a producer was making a decision about rearranging chairs that was going to come too late to matter. Grant Holloway was being guided to a chair positioned too close to the main sofa. The geography of the set was wrong now. 3 chairs where 2 had been planned. Nobody had time to fix it. Jenna Locke looked at her earpiece, looked at the monitor, looked at the crew. Her professional composure had developed a hairline fracture. It was visible only to someone who knew what to look for. Claire was looking at Derek. Derek was looking at the edge of the stage where Kayla stood. He looked away quickly. Too quickly. The same way he had looked away from the glass window in the corridor. Very deliberately, which meant he was very aware she was there. The commercial was ending. The floor director held up 5 fingers. 4, 3. Whatever is about to happen, I am still here. I am 8 months pregnant and my feet hurt, and my coffee went cold and I am still here. 2, 1. What happened next took 4 minutes and 31 seconds. Claire knew the exact time later. When she watched the clip, the way everyone else watched it, frame by frame, slowed down, looking for the moment that contained everything. Right now it was just a Tuesday morning. The lights came back up. Jenna Locke returned to her chair with a smile that was doing its job and nothing more. The floor director's hand dropped. Grant Holloway had been positioned in the extra chair. His distance from Claire was approximately 3 feet. Kayla Brennan stood at the edge of the set, just beyond the camera line. Close enough. Jenna opened with Grant. Professional and efficient. She thanked him for joining the show. Asked about the acquisition. Grant answered the way he did everything. Measured, specific, unhurried. He did not perform enthusiasm. He simply spoke. It was, Claire noticed, a striking contrast to Derek. She was studying Grant Holloway from that slight internal remove she had been using all morning. He was the kind of man who had clearly had loss in him. Not in anything he said. in the way he held himself, a kind of earned stillness, as though he had learned that most things that feel urgent are not actually urgent. Jenna pivoted to Derek, brought him into the conversation. Derek found his footing. The charm came back. He was talking about growth strategy, about opportunity, about what this meant for his team. He was very good at this. And then he stopped. In the middle of a sentence, he stopped. His eyes went to the edge of the set, to where Kayla stood. Something passed between them. Claire could not describe it later. She did not need to. 47,000 people watching at home would understand it immediately and completely. The vocabulary for that particular kind of message between two people required no translation. Jenna was saying something about work-life balance, about being a new father and a newly promoted executive, guiding them back to the human interest angle, the warm close. Derek set his hands on his knees. He looked at the camera. Actually, he said, I think there's something I should say. Jenna turned to him. The quality of her smile changed fractionally, 1 millimeter, a professional's silent alarm. Of course, she said. I need to be honest. His voice was very steady. I can't keep doing this. I'm not in love with Claire anymore. I haven't been for a long time. And Kayla, he looked toward the edge of the set. Kayla and I have been together for almost a year. We're in love. And I know this isn't the right place. But I can't sit here and pretend. He kept talking. Claire knew this because she could see his mouth moving. She could not hear him anymore. There was a sound in her ears that was not a sound. A high, clean silence. The kind that fills in when the brain refuses to process what is coming at it. She sat very still, both hands on her belly. The baby was still. Everything was still. The studio lights were warm on her face. The camera was pointed directly at her. She was aware of Jenna Locke across from her, the professional composure cracking in real time, one hand rising toward her earpiece, the expression of a person who had hosted this show for 11 years and had never once had to make the decision that was being asked of her right now. She was aware of the floor crew, the frozen quality of them, nobody moving, everyone afraid to be the thing that broke this moment further. She was aware of Grant Holloway, 3 feet away, who had not moved. He was looking at her, not with horror, not with the stunned away-turned expression everyone else in the room had. He was looking at her directly. The way a person looks at someone they recognize. Not someone they have met, someone they recognize. I'm 8 months pregnant. I'm on live television. There are 47,000 people watching my face right now, and my husband just told all of them he is in love with someone else. The shoes are still too tight. The coffee was still cold. I got up this morning and let him pick my shoes, and I drank cold coffee, and I smiled in the mirror, and I walked onto the set, and I am still here. I am still here. I am still here. Later, she would not be able to explain what happened next. She would not say she planned it. She would say only that something in her refused to cooperate with what was expected, something that had been compressed and folded down and locked away for a very long time. She did not cry. She did not put her hands over her face. She turned and looked directly at the camera. One breath. Well, she said. Her voice did not tremble. Thank you for letting me know. She placed her hands on her knees. She stood up. 8 months pregnant, blue dress, aching feet. She stood up with the deliberate care of a woman who had decided what happened next belonged to her. She smoothed the dress with both hands. She looked at Jenna Locke. I'm sorry to the viewers for the interruption, she said. I hope the rest of your show is everything it was planned to be. She walked off the set. Every camera in the studio followed her. The floor director could not stop them. Nobody could stop anything. From the edge of the stage, Kayla Brennan watched her go. There was something in Kayla's face that was not victory. It was more complicated than victory. It was the expression of a person who had gotten exactly what they thought they wanted and had just begun to suspect something was wrong with the wanting. On the set, Derek was saying something. Jenna was saying something. The audio was still running. Somewhere, a producer was deciding when to cut. Grant Holloway stood up. He said something brief and quiet to Jenna. Not caught on camera, never confirmed on the record. He turned and walked through the studio door that Claire had walked through. The cameras cut to commercial 12 seconds later. The corridor outside the studio was gray and fluorescent. A water cooler stood against the far wall. It made a low, gurgling sound, the same every few seconds, patient and indifferent. Claire stood with her back against the cool wall. She looked at the ceiling. She placed one hand on her belly. She took 8 slow breaths. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way the prenatal class had taught her. She was not crying. She was not ready to cry yet. She was in the phase before crying. The phase that was perfectly, terrifyingly still, like water before it boils. She stood there for 3 minutes and 20 seconds. The water cooler gurgled. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang twice and went unanswered. The monitor in the hallway played a commercial for a furniture store. The jingle was cheerful and inconsequential. The door opened quietly. Grant Holloway stepped into the corridor. He did not approach her. He simply stood there, near the door, giving her the full space of the hallway. He put his hands in his pockets. He said nothing. After a moment, he said, "Is there someone I can call for you?" "No," Claire said. "I'm fine." He nodded. He said nothing else. He did not argue with the word fine. He did not offer alternatives. He nodded with the particular quality of a man who understood that a person might need to say they were fine and might need that to be respected, regardless of its accuracy. They stood in the corridor for another minute without speaking. Then he reached into his jacket pocket. He produced a card. He crossed the hallway and held it out to her. She took it. "When you're ready," he said. "No urgency." He went back through the studio door. Claire stood alone in the corridor. She looked at the card. Grant Holloway, Holloway Acquisitions, Nashville, Tennessee. A phone number. An email address. Nothing else. She put the card in her bag. These were the 3 minutes and 20 seconds in which Claire Ashworth became a person she had not yet met. Beth Calloway called at 11:43 in the morning. By then, the clip had been shared 40,000 times. By then, Good Morning Nashville was the top trending search in Tennessee. By then, Derek Ashworth's name was attached to words that his mother was reading on her phone in her kitchen in Brentwood, her hand shaking, her teacup going cold on the counter. Claire did not know any of this yet. She was in the back seat of an Uber, having told Beth she needed 30 minutes to be nobody. 30 minutes in a stranger's car with the window cracked and the Nashville skyline moving past. Nobody asking her anything. Nobody looking at her face. The driver was a young man playing country music at a respectful volume. He glanced in the rearview mirror once. He saw her face. He made the decent, human decision not to say a word. I gave up my job. This was what she was thinking. Not about Derek and Kayla. Not about the camera. Not about 47,000 people watching her face this morning. She was thinking about the job she left 2.5 years ago. The office on the 4th floor of Callaway Brand Group. The window that faced west and caught the afternoon light and made the whole room amber at 4 in the afternoon. The campaigns she built from nothing. The feeling of walking into a presentation with something she had created and watching the room shift toward it. I gave it up for him. I gave it up so we could start a family, he said. So he could focus on his career, I said, because I was trying to reframe it generously. I gave up the thing I was best at so I could be his wife. and he used those 2.5 years to fall in love with someone else. She was not angry yet. The anger was coming. She could feel it at the edges, like weather moving in. But right now she was in grief. Grief for the woman she used to be. The woman who won the Regional Advertising Award at 29 and cried in the parking garage because she had not expected it. Who had a 401k and business cards and a specific chair that held her name in a way that had nothing to do with any man. Somewhere along the way, I became invisible, not just to him, to myself. The Uber stopped outside the building on 5th Avenue. Claire got out. Beth was parked at the curb in her old blue Subaru, hazard lights blinking. When Claire got in the passenger seat, Beth reached across immediately. She took both of Claire's hands in both of hers and held them. She did not speak first. She just held them. "Tell me," Beth said finally. "You saw it," Claire said. "Tell me anyway." So Claire told her. From the green room and the shoes to the corridor and the water cooler and the card. She told it with her voice very flat and very controlled. The way you speak when you are managing a fragile thing carefully, aware that one wrong movement could shatter it. Beth listened. She did not interrupt. She did not offer the "I told you," so that was clearly being marshaled somewhere behind her eyes. When Claire finished, Beth was quiet. Then she said, "How are your feet?" Claire almost laughed. Almost. "Terrible," she said. Beth reached into the back seat and produced a pair of soft gray socks. Claire stared at them. She did not know why the sight of those socks, the practical, unglamorous, entirely premeditated kindness of them, was the thing that finally made her eyes sting. But it was. "I brought 3 kinds of soup," Beth said. "The freezer kind, because that's what you want when everything is wrong. And I have your mother on standby. She's not coming unless you say yes. She knows she sometimes makes things worse." Those were her exact words. "That's very self-aware for my mother." "She's been watching the clip on a loop for 2 hours," Beth said. "It's made her reflective." The clip. Claire let the word sit in the car for a moment. "How bad is it?" Beth's expression answered before she did. "Claire, honey, it's very bad," she said. "But also, and this is important, it's very bad for him. The way you walked off that set. The things people are saying about how you handled it. You are not the villain in this story." "I'm not interested in being a story." "I know," Beth said. "But you are one, for a little while, and we need to figure out how to move through it." Claire looked out the windshield. The afternoon Nashville light was low and gold, the kind that used to make the city feel generous. Right now it just looked like weather. "There's something else," Claire said. "Okay." "Grant Holloway followed me out of the studio." Beth went completely still. The Grant Holloway. He was the next segment guest. He was sitting right there when it happened. When I walked out, he followed me into the corridor. She paused. "He didn't say anything at first. He was just there, and then he asked if there was someone he could call for me. I said no, I'm fine." He nodded like he knew I wasn't fine and was choosing to respect the fact that I needed to say it anyway. Another pause. Then he gave me his card. Beth absorbed this slowly. "Grant Holloway gave you his card." "He bought Derek's company," Claire said. "I don't know what any of it means yet." Beth looked at her for a long moment. "Okay," she said. "Socks first. Soup second. Lawyers third." "Lawyers today," Claire said. "Not third." Beth started the car. Derek called at 4:17 in the afternoon. Claire watched his name on her screen through 2 full rings. She answered. "Claire," he said, "I need you to understand." "I understand perfectly," she said. "I'll be in touch through lawyers." She ended the call. 3 seconds later, her phone rang. An unfamiliar number. "Ms. Ashworth," said a woman's voice, precise, measured. the voice of someone accustomed to delivering information that changed things. My name is Helen Marsh. I specialize in matrimonial law. I've been following the news today, and I want you to know you don't have to navigate this alone. Can we talk? Claire looked out Beth's passenger window. The city was still going about its business, traffic, people, the ordinary machinery of a Tuesday afternoon continuing without pause. Yes, Claire said, we can talk. I deserve better than this. I have always deserved better than this. It just took 47,000 witnesses for me to stop pretending otherwise. Helen Marsh's office was on the 7th floor of a building on Church Street. It smelled of good wood and clean paper. The bookshelves were organized by color and height. The window faced south over the city and was kept spotlessly clean. A small bowl of peppermints sat on the corner of the desk. Helen did not offer them. They were decorative. She had never understood why she kept them there and would likely remove them before the year was out. She was the kind of woman who had thought about removing those peppermints many times and kept not doing it. Claire sat across from her on Thursday morning, 2 days after the broadcast. She had slept approximately 9 hours total across those 2 days. She looked it. She had stopped caring that she looked it, which was itself a piece of evidence that something important was already shifting. Helen went over the basics with the efficient, unsentimental clarity of someone who did this every day and had made peace with that fact. Assets, property, prenuptial agreement. There was not one, 4 years of marriage, one child imminent. Derek's income, his commission structure, his bonus history. The question of what starting over looked like financially when you had been out of the professional workforce for 2.5 years and were about to give birth in 4 weeks. The state of Tennessee is fairly clear on imputed income and equitable division of marital assets, Helen said. The public nature of the incident may work in your favor if Derek contests anything. He called me, Claire said, yesterday and this morning. What did he say? She thought about Derek's voice on the phone, the voice she had known for 4 years. It was trying, now, to manage the situation. That was the word that kept coming to her. Manage. He had not called to apologize. He had called to contain, to offer explanations that functioned as damage control, a series of framing devices designed to make what had happened into something she should absorb and cooperate with. He said it wasn't what it looked like, Claire said. Helen's face did something that was almost a raised eyebrow, but stayed technically neutral. On national television, he said he got overwhelmed, that it came out wrong, that he doesn't actually want to end the marriage. He just wanted to be honest. She paused. He offered those two things as though they were compatible. And what did you say? I didn't say anything, Claire said. I listened. And while I was listening, I realized something. He wasn't a monster delivering a speech. He wasn't even frightened. He was small. He was exactly as small as he has always been. And I have spent 4 years making myself smaller to match him so he didn't feel insufficient. She was quiet for a moment. The strange thing is, I'm not even angry at him right now, she said. I'm just disappointed. The way you're disappointed when you finally read the fine print and realize you knew all along the deal was bad. Helen looked at her for a long moment. Most people, she said, and this was as close to personal as Helen ever got with clients, come to me after 20 years of marriage with more anger than you have after 4 days. The anger is coming, Claire said. I can feel it in there. I'm just not there yet. When it arrives, Helen said, it's going to be very useful. Don't fight it. They returned to the documents. The joint account, which Derek had not yet touched. The car, which was in Claire's name. The apartment, leased, not owned, which simplified things. And the savings account Claire had maintained separately since before the marriage, without explanation. without fully understanding why she needed something entirely her own. That's the thing I knew, the thing I kept secret from myself for years. Some quiet part of me knew I might one day need a way out. I kept the account because I knew. I'm not going to be ashamed of that. I'm going to be grateful. In the hallway after the meeting, her phone buzzed. A message from a number she had saved as Grant H. It read, "I wanted to follow up to make sure you connected with appropriate support. I should also be transparent. I'm completing a staffing review at Meridian. There may be some movement in the coming weeks. If it's not an intrusion, I'd like to keep the line open." She read it twice. It was the most carefully worded message she had received in years. Every sentence doing precisely what it intended. Nothing hidden, nothing extra. When is the last time someone sent me a message with no hidden agenda in it? She typed back, "Thank you. I'll be in touch." She took the elevator to the lobby. She stood at the glass doors looking out at Church Street, Nashville in October. Leaves just starting to turn, the air with a first edge of bite in it. 4 weeks until the baby, a lawyer, Beth's apartment, a savings account, a card from a man who had followed her into a corridor and asked a single clean question and then given her space. She passed a newsstand on the way to her car. One of the local papers had a photograph from the broadcast. Herself on the cream-colored sofa. The moment just after Derek stopped speaking, just before she stood. Her face in the photograph was the face of someone navigating the distance between what they had known and what they now had to admit knowing. She stopped. She looked at the photograph for a long time. She bought the paper. She put it in her bag without reading the headline. Starting over feels impossible, but staying was always worse. I just kept waiting for it to become impossible enough that I could stop pretending. Well, it's impossible enough now. She walked to her car. She got in. She sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel. The city was loud and ordinary outside the windows. The sky was the gray-blue of October afternoons. She started the engine. She drove toward Beth's apartment. She drove toward whatever came next. She drove the way you drive when the old destination has been removed from the map and you do not yet have a new one. But you understand, with the cold clarity of a woman who has finally stopped lying to herself, that the driving is the point. She went back to the apartment on the 9th day. Derek had moved out. He was in a hotel, Helen had told her. She did not ask which one. She went back because it was still her home, or had been, or would be hers to leave on her own terms. She was tired of leaving things to other people's terms. The apartment looked exactly the same. That was the disorienting part. She had expected it to be different, to bear some visible mark of what had been done inside it. But the kitchen was the same kitchen. The couch they had argued about in the furniture store and then both loved was the same couch. The Edward Hopper print in the hallway, the one she had found at a Nashville art fair 3 years ago and bought with her own money without asking anyone's opinion, was still on the wall. Things did not change their appearance just because you had changed your understanding of them. She moved through the apartment slowly. She opened drawers she had opened 1,000 times. She found Derek's things in the bathroom cabinet. His razor, his expensive face wash, 3 varieties of the same cologne. She opened a paper bag and placed them in it with the flat efficiency of someone performing a task that required not feeling. She tied the bag. She put it outside the front door. Then she went into the nursery. They had painted it 6 months ago, sage green, a particular shade she spent 2 weeks selecting, and then repainted once because the first coat was slightly too blue. The crib was white. The mobile above it had small paper stars that turned slowly in the air from the door. Beth had come over to help assemble the crib. They had spent 4 hours, fighting the instructions, and ordered pizza, and finished past midnight, and it was, Claire realized now, one of the best evenings she had had in years, because she had been entirely herself in it. No performance required. She sat in the glider chair in the corner. The city outside was quiet. It was 2:40 in the morning. The particular stillness of Nashville at this hour, the ambient glow of the highway in the distance. She placed her hand on her belly. The baby shifted. A small, enormous movement, the communication of a presence that had no words yet, but had certainty, unmistakable and total. Who am I without this marriage? She said it out loud, into the dark, into the room. The room did not answer. The mobile turned slowly. The city glowed soft in the window. I know who I was before it. I know what I was capable of before it. The question is whether she still exists. Whether I left her behind in that fourth-floor office on a Tuesday morning 2.5 years ago. Whether I am someone completely different now, someone who learned to fill the days of a marriage that was already halfway empty by managing the household and the appointments and the social calendar and the careful architecture of a life that looked good from the outside. Because I was very good at making things look good from the outside. Can that other woman still exist inside this body that is about to become someone's mother? Or is it one or the other? Career woman or mother? Professional or the person who stayed? Why is that even a question? Why have I been treating it as a question? She sat in the glider for a long time. She did not cry. She was in a place past the reach of that particular release. She was in the marrow of it. The cold, plain fact. She had built a life around someone else's reality. When that reality withdrew, she did not know what was underneath. She was about to find out. She was terrified of finding out. She was more terrified of not finding out. At 3:45 in the morning, she started reorganizing the closet. Not the nursery closet, the master bedroom walk-in, the enormous one they had divided in half, his side still partly populated with the things he hadn't taken. Shirts, ties, 3 suits she had not been present to watch him choose. She went to his side first. She took everything off the hangers. She folded each item with a precision that was almost violent. She put them in boxes from the hall closet. She labeled them with a black marker. She stacked them by the front door. Then she went to her side. Her clothes had been pushed progressively toward the left wall over the years as Derek's collection expanded. Her work clothes from before, the blazers, the structured dresses, the heels she had not worn in 2 years. She took them out. She rehung them in the center of the closet, in the space his clothes had occupied. She spread out. This is mine. All of this is mine. I have been standing at the edge of my own life, and I am done standing at the edge. She worked until 5:30 in the morning. The closet was immaculate when she finished. The blazers hung in color order. The shoes were on the rack. The baby had not stopped moving the entire time. Small kicks and rolls, a companion in the work. She stood in the doorway looking at what she had done. We're going to be okay, she said, not to herself, to the baby. I don't know how yet, but we are. She went to the kitchen. She made coffee. She stood at the window and opened her laptop and searched her own name. One of the top results was an article. The headline read, "Claire Ashworth is every woman who ever held it together when she had every right to fall apart." It had been written by a blogger in Atlanta with 80,000 followers. Claire read it to the end. The last sentence said, "We don't know Claire Ashworth, but we have all up in Claire Ashworth. The moment she stood up from that sofa will live in my mind for a very long time." Claire closed the laptop. She stood at the kitchen window and drank her coffee and watched the sun come up over Nashville. The sky went the color of peach, and then gold, and then a pale, clear blue. It was the most beautiful she had found anything in weeks. Her phone rang at 9 in the morning. A woman's voice, crisp and organized. Ms. Ashworth, this is calling on behalf of Grant Holloway. Mr. Holloway is in Nashville through Thursday. He would like to know if you might be available for a brief conversation at your convenience. He's aware of everything happening and wants to be respectful of your time and energy. A pause. He also asked me to mention, and I'm quoting him directly, that he has a proposition that might be worth 20 minutes. Claire stood at her kitchen window. The coffee was still warm in her hand. The sage-green nursery door was open behind her. The blazers hung in the center of a closet that was entirely, unmistakably hers. I deserve to take up space. I have always deserved to take up space. I was told by a man who needed me small, that I was asking for too much. I was asking for exactly the right amount. That ends now. Tell him I'm available Thursday, Claire said. The restaurant was called Josephine, and it was in 12 South, and it was quiet in the middle of the day, in the way that mattered. Good corner tables, good light. The kind of menu where nobody had to explain their food choices. Claire arrived 12 minutes early. Deliberately. She had decided, in the 2 days since the assistant's call, that she was done being the person who arrived and adjusted to whatever room she found. She ordered water. She asked for the corner table. She smoothed her dress over her belly. She sat down. She was 32 years old and 8 months pregnant and about to have a business meeting with a billionaire, and she was choosing, firmly, not to be intimidated by any part of that sentence. Grant Holloway was 6 minutes late. When he came through the door, he spotted her immediately. He walked across the restaurant with that same quality she had noticed in the studio. Unhurried. No performance in it. He sat down without the production of sitting down. He did not compliment the restaurant or tell her she looked well. She had been bracing for both and was relieved by neither. I appreciate you making the time, he said. Tell me about the proposition, she said. He almost smiled at that. Right, he said. Okay. Holloway Acquisitions was in the middle of a full brand audit of Meridian Group. Not just financial, structural, cultural, communicative. The company had been operating with an internally focused marketing identity for years. He wanted to rebuild the public-facing brand from the ground up. He had marketing directors at the holding company level who could handle the infrastructure. But what he needed was someone who understood the Nashville market. Someone who understood Meridian's existing client relationships. Someone who could build a campaign narrative that transitioned the company from what it was into what it was becoming. I need someone with real campaign instincts, he said. Not a consultant, not a firm. Someone who can sit inside it and think. I left full-time work 2.5 years ago, Claire said. I know. I read your work before you left. The wellness campaign for Callaway Brand Group was particularly strong. The way you translated technical health metrics into consumer storytelling, that's not a skill that disappears in 2.5 years. She looked at him. He was looking back at her without any hidden agenda visible in his face. She had been reading faces for 4 years. She knew the difference now. You're offering this because of what happened on the show, she said. I'm offering it because of what you did before the show, he said. The show told me you had good instincts under pressure. Your portfolio told me the rest. She let that sit for a moment. The baby is due in 4 weeks, she said. The audit timeline gives us 6 weeks before we need campaign concepts. You could start after the birth. Part-time, remote, whatever the structure needs to be. He looked at her directly. This isn't charity. It's a business decision that happens to align with a situation. I want to be clear about both of those things being true. She trusted the clarity of that, the refusal to dress one thing up as the other. Why are you doing this? She asked. The same question she had asked herself about him since the corridor. Genuine, not defensive. He was quiet for a moment. "I was married for 12 years, he said. "My wife died 6 years ago. Cancer." Another pause, the kind of pause that had weight in it. She was in the middle of her career when we had our daughter. She never stopped working. She never stopped being exactly who she was. When I see a capable woman become invisible in her own life, it bothers me. Personally, not professionally. I want to be honest about that. The table was quiet for a moment. She did not need to fill the silence. Neither did he. "Let me think about it," she said. "Take all the time you need," he said. "I mean that literally." She thought about it for 48 hours. She called Beth, who said obviously yes before Claire finished the second sentence. She called her mother, Donna, who said, "What do you know about this man?" in the tone that meant, "Tell me everything." She talked to Helen, who laid out the financial picture in the precise, unflinching way that made the question of whether to accept meaningful work stop being a question at all. She called Grant's assistant on a Wednesday morning and said yes. And then, because she was 8 months pregnant and had been up since 4 in the morning and had just made the most significant professional decision of the past 3 years, she sat down on the kitchen floor and laughed. Not the broken kind of laughing that is really crying. Real laughing. The kind that surprises you. The kind that comes from somewhere you had forgotten was capable of producing that particular sound. The baby kicked. Hard. As if in agreement. "Yeah," Claire said. "I know. Let's go." She found the old performance review that morning in a cardboard box she had been carrying between apartments for 2.5 years, still in its frame. The words read, "Claire demonstrates exceptional strategic instinct under pressure." She had left this frame on the wall when she left Callaway Brand Group. She had not understood why at the time. Now she understood. She had left it because she thought she was done needing proof. She thought she had found something better than proof. She had found a man who seemed to believe in her. She had traded the proof for the belief, and ended up with neither. She carried the framed review into the nursery. She hung it above the dresser, across from the mobile with the paper stars. Her daughter, when she arrived, would grow up looking at that sentence. The labor started on a Sunday morning. Not dramatically, not cinematically. Labor started the way it apparently started for most people, which was to say, it began as a slow increasing certainty. A tightening with a different quality than all the other tightenings of the past weeks. Patient and serious and entirely in charge. Claire woke at 5:15 and lay still for 7 minutes determining whether it was real. It was real. She picked up her phone. She called Beth first. Beth said, "I'm already up. I've been up. I knew it was going to be today. Don't ask me how," and was in her car before Claire finished the sentence. She called Donna, her mother, who said 3 things in rapid succession. "Oh, thank God. I'll be there in 45 minutes. And then, in a voice that cost her something, "I love you." Donna did not say that, often or easily. It landed in Claire's woman's chest, with a specific weight she held carefully for the rest of the morning. She did not call Derek. She had his number. There was an argument for calling. He was the father. The law would require his involvement at some point. The most charitable reading of the situation was that he had made a catastrophic decision and was still, regardless of everything, the genetic parent of this child. These arguments existed. She heard them. She would make that call, just not this morning. This morning belonged to her and to the person about to arrive. Derek Ashworth was not going to occupy any part of it. The hospital was Nashville General. Morning shift. The nurse who checked her in was a woman in her 50s named Vera, who had clearly been doing this for 30 years and had the quality of someone for whom no human situation was novel. She settled Claire into a room with a window facing east. The light at sunrise came directly through it. The next 11 hours were what 11 hours of labor were: long, physical, not entirely dignified, periodically frightening, punctuated by moments of startling clarity. Beth was in the chair in the corner. Donna was in the chair by the window. They had achieved in the morning hours an operational truce that would have amazed Claire if she were paying attention. She had other priorities. At some point in the early afternoon, her phone lit up. A message from Grant. "I heard from Garrett that you checked in this morning. I won't intrude. I just wanted to say that whatever comes next, you're going to handle it the way you handle everything. I'll be in touch when you're ready." She showed it to Beth, who read it and looked up with an expression Claire couldn't quite decode. "That man," Beth said carefully, "is very specifically not being inappropriate." "I know," Claire said. "And the fact that he is managing to be that specifically not inappropriate is, itself, somewhat affecting." "I know," Claire said again. "This is going to be complicated." "Everything is complicated," Claire said. "I'm going to have this baby now. We can complicate the rest later." Rose Ashworth arrived at 4:47 in the afternoon. 7 pounds, 3 ounces. She had her mother's nose and an opinion about the world that was evident from the first seconds in it. She was placed on Claire's chest, and Claire looked down at her, and there was no language adequate for what happened in the next 2 minutes. It was not a thought. It was not an emotion in the usual sense. It was something more fundamental than both, a recalibration of everything that was important, immediate, and total. The way a compass needle swings north. "There you are," she thought. "I've been waiting for you." Donna was crying quietly in the chair by the window. The afternoon light came through the east-facing glass, warm and gold, and landed across them both. Beth was pretending not to be crying, which she was. Vera had the expression of a person who had seen this exact moment thousands of times and was still moved by it. Claire held her daughter in the 4:47 light of a Nashville Sunday. She knew, with the certainty of something that had always been true but was only now fully visible, that everything that had to break in order for this moment to exist was worth breaking. 3 hours later, Derek appeared at the hospital. He came with Kayla. This was an error of judgment so significant that even Helen Marsh, when she heard about it, paused for a long moment on the phone and said simply, "He brought her to the hospital." Not a question. Just the absorption of a fact. He was not allowed in the room. Claire made this decision with Beth and Donna present and both silently supportive. A nurse relayed the message to Derek in the hallway that he would like to see the baby. Claire asked the nurse to tell him that when she was ready to have that conversation, she would have it through her attorney. She went back to feeding Rose. Through the closed door, she could hear Derek in the hallway. Not the words, just the cadence. The register of a man realizing the rules had changed, and he no longer controlled any of them. It lasted approximately 4 minutes. Then it stopped. Phyllis Ashworth called at 7 in the evening. Derek's mother. Claire nearly didn't answer. She answered. "I want you to know," Phyllis said, "that what my son did was inexcusable. I am not calling to defend him. I am calling to ask if there is anything you need, and to tell you that you and that baby will always have a grandmother in me, regardless of what happens between you and Derek. That is not negotiable on my part." Claire was quiet. "Thank you, Phyllis," she said. "I didn't know," Phyllis said. Her voice had something in it that cost her. "About the other woman, I want you to believe that." "I believe you," Claire said. She put down the phone. She looked at Rose in the crib beside the hospital bed. Rose was asleep with her fist tucked under her chin, with total confidence in the world. She will know me as someone whole. That is the only thing that is non-negotiable. At 11 in the evening, After Donna and Beth had gone home, the hospital settled into its nighttime quiet. Claire sat in the chair by the east-facing window. The Nashville lights were spread below, the city at night, amber and still. She had a small styrofoam cup of hospital tea, gone tepid. She held it in both hands. She did not sleep. She did not think about Derek. She did not think about the lawyer, the hearing, the asset discovery, the next move. She watched the city and drank the cold tea and listened to Rose breathe. These were the 23 most peaceful minutes she had known in 2 years. 6 weeks after Rose was born, the custody hearing was scheduled. In those 6 weeks, things happened the way important things always happened. Not dramatically, not cinematically, with the grinding, unglamorous reliability of actual consequence. Derek's position at Meridian Group was restructured out of existence. The brand audit process identified his role as redundant to the new company direction. He received a severance package and a polite letter. He was asked not to come back to the building. Grant Holloway's name was not attached to this decision publicly. It did not need to be. The logic was its own explanation. A company rebuilding its public identity did not retain, as its public face, the man whose public face was currently the most discussed exhibit of morning television betrayal in the calendar year. This was the dignity victory and the success victory arriving together, quietly, without fanfare. Claire did not need to participate in his downfall. She did not need to want it. She watched from a distance the natural consequences of choices made by a man who had forgotten that everything has weight. He called 3 times in the first week. She did not answer. He texted twice. She forwarded both to Helen. This was what lawyers were for. The financial picture Helen uncovered during discovery was extraordinary in its smallness. Not a grand criminal concealment, just the petty accumulation of a man who had been quietly moving marital funds into a separate account for 14 months. The account had been opened, Helen noted in the tone of a woman who had been waiting to deliver this particular fact, 11 days after Derek and Kayla appear to have become romantically involved. $46,000 over 14 months. He was building an exit fund, Claire said in Helen's office. That's one way to describe it, Helen said. He was planning this for over a year. While I was pregnant, while I was setting up the nursery and choosing paint colors and going to prenatal appointments. The timeline supports that. She sat with this. The baby was with Donna today. Donna, who had shown up every Tuesday and Thursday morning for 6 weeks with homemade food and 4 hours of arms willing to hold Rose while Claire worked. Claire, who had been working, actually working in the deep, satisfying way she had forgotten existed, on the Meridian rebrand from her kitchen table in the margins of new motherhood. What does this do for our position? She asked. It strengthens it significantly, Helen said, in the satisfied tone of a woman who had been waiting for exactly this. Kayla Brennan called on a Wednesday morning. Claire stared at the name on her screen through one full ring. She answered. Silence. Then Kayla said, I know you have no reason to talk to me. I'm talking, Claire said. Say what you came to say. What Kayla said, over the next 22 minutes, was this. She had retained her own attorney. She and Derek were no longer together. The relationship had ended 3 weeks after the broadcast, when Derek told her, with a candor he apparently reserved for the worst possible timing, that he had told Kayla the marriage was already effectively over, that he and Claire had been done for a year, that the pregnancy was unplanned and complicated things, that Kayla was the relationship he was choosing. None of this was true. As Kayla, watching the coverage and reading between the available lines, had since understood. She had been given a version of events that cast her as rescuer in a finished story instead of complication in an active one. She had been lied to in her own particular way, by the same man. She wanted to know if Claire would be willing to submit a joint statement to family court, not exonerating anyone, simply establishing the timeline of Derek's deceptions as they had affected both of them. "Why are you doing this, Claire?" "Yes," Claire asked, the same question she had asked Grant. She was developing a habit of asking the honest question. "Because I don't want to be the villain in someone else's story when I didn't know I was in it," Kayla said. Her voice was not soft, but it was honest. There was something in it Claire recognized, the sound of a person taking stock of themselves. "I'll think about it," Claire said. "That's fair," Kayla said. After the call, Claire sat in the kitchen of the apartment that was now entirely hers, Derek's name off the lease, his belongings collected and gone. The Hopper print, the only thing on the hallway wall that had ever truly belonged to her. Rose was asleep in the nursery. The apartment was quiet in the way a space is quiet when it has become entirely yours. She thought about Kayla for a long time. She thought about the difference between forgiveness as grace extended toward someone who harmed you and the simple pragmatic recognition that two people who had been lied to had more in common than the person who had lied to both of them. She thought about the kind of woman she wanted to be. Specifically, the kind of woman she wanted to be in front of a daughter who was going to watch her make every significant choice for the next 2 decades. She called Helen. The custody hearing happened on a cold November Thursday, 3rd floor of the Davidson County Courthouse, small room. The smell of floor wax and old paper and the particular tension of a space where people came to have important things decided. Derek was there in a new suit with a new lawyer, looking like a man who had recently understood, for the first time in full, the consequences of a decision made in a television studio on a Tuesday morning in October. He was being very appropriate. Careful, eyes forward, his attorney had clearly prepared him for the optics. He saw Rose for the first time in the courtroom. Claire watched his face when he saw her. It was the most genuine expression she had seen on him in years. Not performed, not managed, just real. He looked at his daughter with something that had cost him. She did not soften entirely, but she noted it. The hearing proceeded broadly as Helen had predicted. Joint legal custody, primary residential custody with Claire, child support calculated on Derek's previous income with a pending motion tied to the discovered account. Visitation structured and supervised in the near term. Derek signed the documents. His pen moved across the paper. When he finished, he looked up at Claire across the table. "I'm sorry," he said. Not with the management quality of the earlier apologies, not with the framing and the strategic positioning, with the flat, bare quality of a person who had run out of everything else. She looked at him. "I know," she said. That was all. It was enough. Walking out of the courthouse, she passed a window that reflected her back. Gray coat, Rose in the carrier against her chest. Helen's briefcase in her hand. She stopped. She looked at the woman in the reflection. She looked like herself. Not like the woman in the blue dress on the cream-colored sofa. Not like the woman who had let someone else pick her shoes. Like herself. The woman who won the award and cried in the parking garage. The woman who reorganized the closet at 3:45 in the morning. The woman who sat on the kitchen floor and laughed. She nodded once at the reflection. A small, private, entirely sufficient thing. She walked on. 8 months later, Nashville in June. The city warm and full of itself the way it got in early summer. Street festivals, outdoor dining, the particular energy of a place that believed, with some justification, that it was exactly the right size. Claire Ashworth was 40 minutes early to a meeting she had been preparing for all week. She had kept the name. Not for Derek's sake, because it was Rose's name and she saw no reason to complicate Rose's sense of herself over something as ultimately unimportant as Claire's feelings about a surname. The meeting was at Holloway Acquisitions, 15th floor of a building on Commerce Street. West-facing windows she had already mapped mentally. She intended to use them as an argument for the visual language of the campaign she had been building for 12 weeks. She was not part-time anymore. Part-time had lasted 6 weeks, the 6 weeks after Rose was born, when she worked from the kitchen table in the early morning and late-night windows while Rose slept. Then Donna had made a proposal about structured weekly childcare. Claire had made a counter-proposal. By the time they were done, the arrangement was thoroughly Donna's idea, in the way that all of Donna's best contributions became Donna's idea, and everyone was comfortable with that. Claire had returned to full-time, not in the old sense, in the new sense, full-time that included a person who was also a mother, which was a different thing, which she was still figuring out and had decided to figure out instead of performing having already figured out. She arrived in the lobby of the Commerce Street building, got coffee from the cart downstairs, went over her notes in the elevator. She had the quality of aliveness she got before a presentation she believed in. A fine clarifying edge. The best kind of nerves, the kind closely related to fear but oriented toward the future instead of away from it. Garrett Owens met her at the elevator bank on the 15th floor. Grant's chief of staff, dry and efficient and slightly amused by existence in general, which was the most stabilizing quality a person could have in a professional setting. "Mr. Holloway is wrapping another call," Garrett said. 5 minutes. "I know," Claire said. "I arrived early." He said he noticed. He said it as a compliment. She set up in the conference room, connected her laptop, arranged the campaign concept boards across the table in the sequence she intended to present them. She was doing exactly what she had always done before important presentations, and the muscle memory of it was the most encouraging thing she had experienced in months. The proof that the years of quiet, of deliberate smallness, of choosing not to take up space, had not erased anything, had only covered it. Covered was not gone. Grant came in at 9 after. They shook hands the way people who had been working together for months and had built, without discussing it, a functional and increasingly mutual trust shook hands. Easy. No performance in it. They had not hurried this. They had both learned the cost of hurrying. The presentation went well. It went very well. 3 members of the acquisitions team engaged with her concepts with a substantive pushback that indicated they were taking it seriously rather than politely approving it. She responded to the pushback with precision. Fast and specific and entirely herself, the kind of self she had been before the marriage and had been rediscovering since. When the others filed out, Grant stayed. He was looking at the second concept board, the one with the campaign line she had spent the most time on. "The second board," he said, "the line about building in the right direction." "Yes," she said. "That's personal to you." Not a question. She considered it anyway. "Everything I do is personal to me," she said. "I was never very good at separating them." He nodded. "Me neither," he said. "It's usually the best work, the stuff you can't separate." They were standing at the conference table, and the Nashville skyline filled the west-facing windows behind him, and the afternoon light was doing exactly what she had predicted it would do. Coming in gold and warm, the way it always came in from the west in June, she looked at him with the openness she had been cultivating for 8 months now. The habit of seeing things without the pre-interpretation, without the protective layer of managed expectation. He was a careful man. He had had something taken from him and had taken great care not to replace it carelessly. She understood that entirely. "Rose and I are going to the park tonight," she said. "If you happen to be free and happen to want coffee in a park, that is an option that exists." He looked at her for a long moment, the kind of moment that was not uncomfortable and did not need to be filled. "What park?" he said. She smiled at him, the real smile, not the practiced one, the one she had almost forgotten existed. She told him. She was in the elevator lobby, on the ground floor, when she saw Derek. This was not arranged, not planned. The confluence of a small city and a Tuesday afternoon and whatever unnamed force made things happen in the order they happened. He was near the building entrance, talking to a man she didn't recognize. He saw her before she saw him. She knew this because she saw the slight change in his posture, the social calculation, the one you made when someone you had hurt appeared in your line of sight and you needed to decide in 1 second how to carry yourself. She crossed the lobby. Rose was in the carrier, against her chest, 8 months old, in the phase of examining everything with total scientific commitment. She was currently extremely interested in the decorative plant near the elevator bank. Her small hand kept reaching toward it. Claire passed Derek at approximately 6 feet of distance. "Hey, Claire," he said. She looked at him. "Hey, Derek," she said. She did not feel what she had once thought she might feel in this moment. She did not feel the residual anger that Helen had told her would be useful and had been. That had served its purpose and was now spent. She did not feel the grief she had worked through in the nursery in the small hours of October. That also had served its purpose and was also spent. She did not feel the cold disappointment of looking at a monster and finding a mediocre man. That had passed many months ago. She felt nothing. Not the nothing of emptiness, the nothing of completion, the nothing of a lock that had been aligned at last and opened and stood there now, simply no longer requiring anything of the hand that had once held the key. She nodded. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. Rose was reaching toward the decorative plant with focused determination. Claire redirected her hand gently toward a button on her own coat. Rose immediately transferred her scientific attention to the button, examining it with the thoroughness of someone who suspected it contained important information. The elevator opened. They went in. The doors closed. The lobby was gone. There, she thought. That's the whole thing. That's the distance I needed to travel. Not to forgiveness as performance, not to friendship, not to the version of the story where we both grow and acknowledge lessons and arrive at some mature, mutual understanding. Just to here. Just to nothing. Just to me, going up in an elevator, holding my daughter's hand. She had a meeting in 7 minutes. She had a campaign to finish. She had a park to go to tonight, and a man who is going to try very hard to be present and careful and worthy of her time. And she was going to hold him to exactly that standard, no more, no less. She had a daughter who was investigating elevator buttons with the thoroughness of a scientist who suspected they contained secrets. She had herself, entirely, inconveniently, usefully herself. The elevator opened on the 15th floor. Claire walked out. She was wearing the shoes she had chosen this morning. Later, standing alone in the conference room, for a moment before the next meeting, she looked south, out the west-facing window at the Nashville skyline. The same skyline, printed on the curved wall behind Jenna Locke's chair on a Tuesday morning 10 months ago. She looked at it, now the way you looked at a landscape that had once been the backdrop of something terrible and had since become simply landscape again. Present, neutral, yours. She had stood on a cream-colored sofa and thanked 47,000 strangers for their time and walked off a television set and survived. She had sat in a green room with cold coffee and aching feet and felt the first tremor of something she could not name, and she had been right to feel it. She had sat in Beth's car in the October afternoon with a pair of gray socks in her lap, and known, without knowing she knew it yet, that the ground was already shifting towards something better. She had learned that the most destructive things in a life were rarely dramatic. They were quiet. They were slow. They were a choice repeated, a boundary not drawn, a dream set on a shelf and left there so long it stopped seeming like something that could still be taken down. She had learned that the way back to yourself was not a single moment of courage. It was the closet at 3:45 in the morning. It was the cold tea. It was the frame on the nursery wall. It was the email sent on a Wednesday morning to a man who had offered her work and meant it. It was standing up from a sofa on live television and saying thank you for letting me know in a voice that did not tremble. The hardest part was admitting that the life I built for him was always, underneath it, a life built for me too. I just forgot to keep it. I have not forgotten since. I will not forget again. The skyline was the same skyline it had always been. She was not the same woman. She turned away from the window. She went back to work.
Claire Ashworth walked into a television studio on an ordinary Tuesday morning wearing the wrong shoes. She walked out of that studio as herself. That is the whole story, really. Everything else, the betrayal, the lawyer, the billionaire, the career rebuilt from the kitchen table while a newborn slept. All of it was just the path between those two moments. Between the woman who had learned to make herself invisible and the woman who finally, quietly, completely refused. And here is what that story teaches us. First, the slow erosion is the most dangerous kind. We talk a great deal about dramatic betrayals, the moment of discovery, the explosive confrontation, the thing that happens and cannot be undone. But most of the damage in Claire's story, and in so many stories like hers, happened long before the camera turned on. It happened in the small daily surrenders, the job set aside, the opinion unvoiced, the instinct silenced because acting on it felt like too much trouble, too much disruption, too much proof of a problem she was not ready to name. We are very good at explaining away the small things. We call it flexibility. We call it partnership. We call it love. And sometimes it is those things. But sometimes, if we are honest with ourselves in the quiet moments, the 3 a.m. moments, the moments alone in a parked car, we know the difference. We know when we are choosing to stay because we are loved, and when we are choosing to stay because we are afraid of what leaving would require us to become. Pay attention to the small surrenders. They compound. Second, dignity is not something you perform. It is something you return to. Claire did not walk off that set because she was fearless. She walked off because something in her, some compressed, patient, essential part of her, refused, in that particular moment, to cooperate with her own destruction. She had been practicing that refusal for years without knowing it. Every time she kept a separate savings account she could not explain. Every time she quietly noted something that didn't fit and filed it away. Every time she stood in front of a mirror and recognized, behind the careful smile, the woman she had not yet finished becoming. Dignity is not a performance of strength. It is what remains when everything performative has been stripped away. It is standing up from a cream-colored sofa in shoes that hurt your feet and saying, very clearly, without trembling, "Thank you for letting me know. You do not have to be ready. You do not have to be healed. You do not have to have the next step mapped out. You only have to decide that this, whatever this is no longer something you are willing to cooperate with." Third, starting over is not a single moment. It is a practice. We tell ourselves that rebuilding looks like a grand new beginning, a montage, a transformation. The woman who is broken becomes the woman who is whole, and we expect to feel the shift as a single clean break. It does not work that way. It is the 3:45 in the morning closet, the blazers hung in color order, the space taken back, inch by inch, from the person who had been slowly occupying it. It is the email sent on a Wednesday, accepting a job you are not sure you are ready for, because the financial picture your lawyer just laid out has made the question of readiness irrelevant. It is the old performance review found in a box and hung on a nursery wall so that a daughter who does not yet exist can grow up knowing that her mother was once described, in writing, as demonstrating exceptional strategic instinct under pressure. Starting over is a practice. You do it every day, in small decisions and small claims of territory. In every moment, you choose the version of yourself that tells the truth over the version that manages the situation. Fourth, the people who see you clearly in your worst moment, keep them. Beth with the gray socks, Helen with the peppermints she never offered, Grant Holloway standing in a fluorescent corridor asking one clean question and then stepping back, Donna saying I love you in a voice that cost her something. Phyllis calling from Brentwood to say what her son did was inexcusable. None of these people fixed anything for Claire. They could not. The fixing was hers to do. What they did was something simpler and more important. They saw her. They stayed in the room. They brought soup and socks and legal expertise and told the truth and did not ask her to be more composed than she was capable of being. We all need people who will stay in the room. And here is the thing about finding them. They tend to show themselves in the hard moments, not before. You cannot always know in advance who your Beth is, but you find out. And when you find out, hold them, because those people are rare and they are everything. And finally, feeling nothing is not the same as feeling empty. The moment Claire passed Derek in the lobby at the end of the story and felt absolutely nothing. No rage, no grief, no cold disappointment, no residual ache. That was not absence. That was completion. That was the difference between a wound that has not healed and a wound that has healed completely and left clean skin behind. We are taught to measure our recovery by what we feel, by the presence of peace, of gratitude, of forward motion. But the deepest recovery is often marked by what we stop feeling, the weight we stop carrying, the story we stop telling ourselves, the man we stop needing to be angry at, not because he deserves forgiveness, but because the anger has done its work and can now be set down. You will know you are through something when you can stand in a lobby, look at the person who hurt you, say 2 words, and walk toward the elevator without a second thought. That is not indifference. That is freedom. That is what 10 months of choosing yourself, one small, deliberate choice at a time, actually looks like from the outside. Not a declaration, not a dramatic exit, just a woman pressing an elevator button while her daughter investigates the decorative plant. Just a woman going up. If any part of this story found you today, if it spoke to something you are living through, or something you have survived, or something you are still in the middle of, know this: you are not alone in it. And the version of you that walks out of this on the other side, wearing the shoes she chose herself, is already there. She is waiting. She has been waiting the whole time. Take your time getting to her, but keep moving. Closing disclaimer. The content in this story was manually researched, developed, and edited by our team with the intention of bringing meaning, emotional truth, and genuine life lessons to every person who listens. Every detail was crafted by human hands, human judgment, and human care, because we believe that stories told with intention have the power to reach people in the moments they need them most. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening all the way through.